Hi everyone. This is chapter 6, um, which is one of the builds off of chapter 3 on objects with it, and I think this is one of the little in-depth chapter looking at classes. Um, like I said, it's one of the hardest thing about when you look at objects. It's pretty abstract, and the stuff that we're doing is dealing with the RAM memory, and it is kind of abstract with when you look at it. So let's walk through some of the stuff that I'm about to talk to you about. We're going to talk about some of the things such as what's called static class members, which is different from the traditional class members we looked at. We're going to look at the overloading of methods. It's very similar. If you remember, in 1436 we talked about signatures with it. We're going to talk about overloading constructors, again, dealing the part with the parameters and signatures with it. We're going to talk about the passing of the objects as an argument to methods, returning objects and methods with this thing. And then the two-string method, of course, and writing an equal method as well. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's called methods of that copies an object with it. Aggregation is very important because it relates to one of the labs that we're going to do. So this is one of the components that we talk about, the lab part, that talks about a class inside of another class that's being aggregated. Bear with me with this terminology. We're going to look at this for a moment. And of course, this reference variable, the inner class, the enumerated type, and the garbage collection, mainly specifically for Java programming language with it. So, and the last one is object collaboration. Let's take a look at the first thing I needed to talk to review of instance, field, and methods with this. So if you look at each instance of a class, it has its own copy of the instance variable with this. So if you recall, since chapter, we talked about chapter 3, when we talked about the rectangle that defines the length and the width of the field with it, that's the class. The rectangle is the class, and the demo class is where you instantiate those that rectangular class with it. Each instance of the rectangular class have different value stored in the length and the width with it. The instance method require that instance to be class to be created in the order to be used. Remember now, if you had when we had that rectangular class, the length and the width, it's in that particular order it's being used. You can't swap the width instead of the length instead of the width. It's you change out the signature with it. Instance method typically interact with the instance field or calculate based on those fields with it. So the things that we do that really impacts, and again, that's just a review of the fields and methods with it. When you have, this is the new stuff that comes in, when you have something that's called static class, okay? Now static class, in your book, it starts on page 354. Static fields and static method do not belong to a single instance of that class, okay? You can have a static field and you can have a static method, but they do not have to belong to that single instance of that class. That's pretty profound. All right, that's pretty profound. So to invoke a static method or to use a static field, the class name rather than the instance name is used. So in this case, in this example, when we use the math class name, you can use the static method. Now this static method doesn't have to belong to the math, right? It could be dot square, it could be something else with it. So this is how you invoke. You call it, and then you're going to basically pass across the 25, square root of 25 assigns to the value here. All right, so that's what that's talking about right now with it. That's just an example with it. That's static. Again, I don't want to get too far with this thing, but that was the static field, which is different from static method. Both of these things don't have to belong to a single instance of a class. So let's talk about the first one. Here's a static field. Class fields are declared using static, the word reserved word, keyword between the access identifier and the field type. So when you create that field, normally you would actually create that field as a private, but if you add the word static with the data type and the name, the identifier, and you initialize it to 0, the field is initialized to 0 only once, regardless of the number of times the class is instantiated. So the primitive static field are initialized to 0 if no initialization is performed. I have two examples in the book. Okay, the first one is the countable.java we're going to take a look at, and the second one is the static demo. Alright, so let's take a look at the countable one I have right now. This is the countable one. This is on page, this is code listing 6-1. This is on page 354. So look at this class. Here's countable. You're going to use static. You're going to assign initialize an instance count is 0. Of course, your first one is your constructor. This is your constructor. How do you know? Well, if you recall, it's the same name as your class, same name as your file. All right. Look at how this is instance count. So you're going to add 1 to that 0 to it, and you're going to update it with it. So, and then you also are going to have the one that's actually going to return the instance count with it. So this is the one that you're going to use as a static field in this right now with it. And the static field, the constructor gives an increment static field count. This keeps track of their instance of the class that's being created. Alright, so this is the one that's countable with it, right? Let's take a look at the second one. The static demo. So in the static demo, you did in the int object is the identifier, create 3 instances of the countable class with this countable. So the countable one, which we just looked at a few minutes ago, this is how you instantiate 3 static objects with this. Okay, get the number of instances from this class static field. So now I have this object. By using this class, I create instantiating this object, which is object 1, and I can actually call and get the instant count method, and that will assign to object count, and that would actually create, here's your object count here. Okay, so you have individual ones that you could create in this, the way how it looks like with it. Okay, same, very similar to the recent classes that you have with it as well. Let me minimize this. Let's take your static field. So in your static field, that was in your static members. Static members, you have static fields, and of course you have static methods, right? Fields and methods, they make up your what's called your static members in this. Now let's look at your instance count field. Your static number 3. Those 3 are now assigned to object 1, 2, and 3, based off of that static demo that we just looked at, right? So you look at your static demo. This is if you created an object count. That object count is assigned to 3 to it. You can actually have 3 objects that's pointing to the 3 static objects that's pointing to the same thing. Okay. Let me pause right here for a moment, and we'll get started on part 2. Okay.